Cricket et al. It's a website, it's a podcast.
Pete, it's a way of life. It's Gideon Haig over here.
It's Peter Lawler over here.
And welcome to a special episode of Cricket et al. With a special guest, Peter Lawler. Who is it?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit excited. We've got a big name on our sort of steampunk-powered podcast today, Gideon, our little state of mind website, whatever it is. Today's guest is someone I've been fortunate enough to cover since he played his first test as a raw-boned teenager in 2011. He is the man of the moment, a quick who looks like Clark Kent, but is capable of superhuman feats. Of course, I'm talking about Pat Cummins, Australia's 47th Test captain, a man who carries in his blood the grim resolve of Alan Border, the stewardship of Mark Taylor, and the swag of Dennis Lillee. Fresh from rescuing Australia against Pakistan at the MCG a few days back. Commentators are already starting to ask if he rates among our all-time greats. Patrick Cummins, welcome to the podcast. It's an honour for us to have you here. Yeah.
I would have come on much earlier if I knew that was the intro I was going to do.
Mate,
years ago.
It's going to take a long time for that tyre to go down that I've just pumped up.
Yeah. Fantastically spontaneous introduction. Just off the top of your head, was it, Pete?
Off the top of my head, yeah. Gideon. Yeah. It might have coincided with a few words written down here on the screen.
I actually emailed them through to Pete. That was one of my requirements. Pete had to.
It was in the T's and C's along with no brown M&Ms. Pat, I do want to start at the beginning because that was a pretty exciting time in life. And you look back at it now, it's 13 years ago that you finished school, got on a plane and flew to South Africa. What did you think as a kid coming into that grisly test side?
I think the first thought was, how have I ended up here? Why am I here? It was, literally 6 months earlier, I was at school, had never even, trained with the New South Wales squad, didn't even really think cricket was a career path. And then suddenly I'm on a flight with, some of the greats of the games who have been doing it for 15 years. So, looking around, you got Ricky Ponting, Mike Hussey, Michael Clark was captain. I just couldn't believe I was on the same tour that they kind of are on. So that was kind of my first thought. And then probably the second thought was enjoy it, because I didn't expect it was going to happen or last for very long. And thirdly, if I got a chance, I just wanted to try and kind of just give it as good a crack as I could.
You've carried on as you started out because you won that game with your bat. Fantastic sort of partnership with Mitchell Johnson. You're both limping in the end, crippled, I think, and never seen again. Both of you were out of the game for 12 months. Do you remember batting out there with him? And is that the same way that you approach sort of finishing innings these days? Because you've made a habit of compiling extraordinary partnerships to get the side home with the bat when obviously your batters have let you down or not done the job.
Maybe it's coming a little bit full circle, but I definitely was a lot more, I don't know if naive's the right way to kind of phrase it, but when I look back, it was like really clear in my mind was, I thought if I try to block the ball here and just survive, I'm going to get out. I think that's how I got out in the first innings. So I thought, I made as an 18-year-old, the very obvious leap to, well, I might as well start swinging the bat. And just managed to miss a few, managed to get a hold of a few, but I think for the last 12 years or so, there's no way I would have played anything like that. Like you start thinking about what's at stake, what happens if I get out trying to hit Dale Steyn over cover. All these things don't even enter your mind as an 18, well, didn't enter my mind as an 18-year-old. So I think over the last probably year or two, I've started to think a bit more like that. It's try to not worry about how it looks. It's just about, how do you try and map a path forward? How do you try and most importantly try and score some runs?
Now, full disclosure, while Pete does know Pat, I don't know Pat at all. I know him as well as the majority of listeners through watching him on the cricket field, listening to him talk, just lately reading his new book, Tested. that fake intimacy that we develop with the famous has always interested me, Pat. Does it ever cross your mind how you now enter every one-to-one interaction with another person, the other person knowing much more about you than you do of them, nursing all manner of preconceptions and assumed knowledge? How do you deal with that?
It's funny because it pops up every now and then. I had a couple of weeks ago, I was washing my car out the front of my house, and a mum and her two kids stopped the car and just got out and was like, "Oh, Pat, how you been?" I'm like, "Yeah, pretty good." I just could not place the face at all. And after about 5 minutes, I worked out I'd never met this person in my life. And she kind of realized, I think, after about 4 or 5 minutes, she'd never met me, but she's like,
Yeah.
she goes like, "Oh, we've always just watching you on TV. Sorry, I've never
Yeah.
actually met you."
Yeah.
Look, I think, our industry we're pretty lucky in that, the most of the people that, kind of know me or know us cricketers, it's because they've chosen to watch cricket. They love cricket. They love what we do as a sport. So almost every interaction's amazing. And, it wasn't too long ago that I was the kid watching with my parents at home. So I think you always kind of understand that. You try not to lose sight that, say around test matches, this might be their big day of cricket a year where, they've been saved up or bought their tickets, 12 months ago, and they're going along with their family as a annual tradition or whatever it is. So, I'm always pretty happy to talk to people and hear kind of why they love cricket so much.
See, for Pete and me, the thrill comes from actually being recognised. People coming up to us saying, "Oh, we listen to Cricket Adult," or we read the website. But for you, the transgressive moment is when you're anonymous in the transaction, when someone doesn't recognise you, when you actually have a kind of an innocent exchange with a member of the public. And I think that's true of Becky, isn't it? She didn't know who you were when you met. I mean, it was obviously a lot earlier in the career. Is that a kind of a charming moment when you meet people who aren't clouded by preconceptions?
Oh, it's great. I think that's real life. I think, you hear a lot of people talk about the difference between who you are as a person and who you are as a persona. And a lot of people know the persona, know what, but they don't know you as the actual person. So those kind of moments that's real life. That's who you are. That's, real relationships. It's funny. The first time, Becky and I met, I said I did play cricket, but I didn't probably go into depth. I said I'm injured at the moment, but I like my cricket, but I'm a uni student. And she came over our house one day, and I was living with my brother at that stage, and I had like just 5 cricket bats, around the living room. And I think Brett Lee just released a book, and he just sent me his book. So that was like on the bedside table or something. And she said later, she's like, "I just thought, geez, this guy really likes his cricket."
The moment of discovery was sweet, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I think she just never watched the game. So even if I might have said I played for Australia, whatever like that.
Yeah, she saw your poster in a Hungry Jack's or something. What was that? How she
KFC, I think it was, Pete. KFC, according to Tested.
KFC.
Yeah.
Had a KFC bucket on my head, and yeah.
That's a sweet moment.
Spend the rest of my life with.
But you are actually quite a private person. It's an interesting balance that you've created, and I think you actually walk the tightrope very well. But you are a person who tends to keep their thoughts to themselves, even when pressed. To certain points. I mean, we've known. You haven't really opened the doors on your life, as is the modern way, is it? Or on what you're thinking at the time. I think you bite your lip a lot more than you open your mouth. Am I wrong?
I think on some topics. I think in terms of private life, I do try and keep some distance. Again, at the moment, it's obviously life's quite public in a lot of ways, but it won't be like that forever. And I've got now a family as well, so I think their natural state's quite private. Becky doesn't really like the limelight. Obviously, you know, we've got a 3-year-old, but also another one on the way. So I don't really want to kind of open up their lives kind of deliberately. Look, I think there's some things that we can be totally transparent with, but really things change a lot throughout a season. You know, even just talking about, say, cricketing things, there's niggles that pop up, there's injuries, there's forms, there's different players are going through different things that it's not my place to be public about. So I think there's a natural kind of guard that you have to have up, but we try not to. Well, I certainly try not to do it deliberately. I never try and overstep that. I try and, you know, I don't try and be closed off on certain topics just for the sake of it. I try and be as open as I can.
You do say in Tested that you wished that in the public space there was more generosity and forgiveness and perhaps an acceptance of other points of view, and that when you do speak in the public space, you are aware of this. You tend to sidestep things that are going to be taken, you know, that are going to become clickbait or whatever they become.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I think there's real news, and I mean, I'm talking to you guys. You guys know this far better than I. But you know, a lot of it isn't about what's true or what's the most relevant. It's, you know, what's going to get the most clicks, what's the most entertaining, as opposed to the most newsworthy. So, again, it's a pretty lucky situation that we turn up to a cricket match and we have a press conference full of journalists that want to write about cricket. You know, other sports would be dying to have that attention at times. So, you know, you kind of, for as many cons as it has, it's got a lot of pros as well. So, yeah, I think you just got to be wary at different times, knowing that there's a certain angle that might want to be written about, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean I need to kind of feed it just for the sake of it.
Well, even though you are guarded in your public utterances, earlier this year you did take a bit of a chance. You did say we should have an Australia Day, but we can probably find a more appropriate day to celebrate it. How much did you think about that, or workshop that, or choose your form of words before you came out with it? Because it's clearly something that you don't say off the top of your head.
Look, the funny thing about that one was, I think I've said it about the last 3 years. This year it seemed to spike up and be kind of bigger than other years. But yeah, again, I think there's there's a few different topics that I feel passionate enough to speak on.
Yep.
And probably feel like I've got a strong enough position as well. You know, I think there's some others that I don't really have a strong position on, and I'm happy to say that or not be very public about it. Again, I think to your other point, it's pretty hard to kind of publicly workshop or think through some of those problems. You kind of have to be quite black and white nowadays. I think on the Australia Day one, to me, I think you know, you can get really caught up in trying to get into the minutiae of the arguments. For me, it's simple. You know, I love Australia. I think it's the best country in the world. Is it the best day that we could possibly celebrate Australia? I don't think so. I think there could be another day. So that's as simple as I try to keep it. Don't try and get too caught up in anything else, really. That's as simple as I try and make that. And sorry, getting to your point, I just said that basically as I thought it, and I didn't kind of workshop anything. That's just my opinion.
We'll look after you, Pat. We'll look after you. It's okay. This is the dome. This is the cone of silence.
One thing I do
notice. No one
listens
to this podcast.
One thing I do notice when you walk into these sort of, you know, these areas, you're not provocative. You step lightly, you state your case, and you don't really get into the sort of tit for tat with the other side. And I think I raised this a couple of times because it always impressed me when you accepted the captaincy, and I'd like to talk to you about why about that. But there was that stink with the ex-players about Justin leaving the job, and all eyes were on you and what you were going to say, and you handled it simply, eloquently, elegantly. with a few words. I'll look after my mates. They can look after theirs. And I thought that showed a wise head. I wondered how much you thought about that comment, actually.
It was a probably week or so of a lot of reflection, actually. I knew I didn't really want to speak straight away. Like I felt like there was so much noise and clutter and emotion that if I spoke straight away, I'd probably get caught up in that. I think, there's a couple of things that I felt really strongly about that probably hadn't been represented publicly quite accurately. Like that had been a process that had been running for quite a while. We'd been very, I guess we'd spoken about a lot internally, with the CEO, board members, coaches, players. Like it was something that was happening for a long time. So, I felt like well, from my point of view anyway, I'd done the best I could have in terms of, I was very honest. I was very transparent with the right people. I don't think anything should have come to a shock to anyone internally. So I think when that was kind of playing out publicly, I just thought that was quite wrong. And I didn't really want to go up and have to explain myself straight away just to try and make myself feel better for 5 minutes.
You say you were, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just and that was kind of the thinking. So I just kind of let it kind of just go for a couple of days. I didn't really want to enter the sphere just because I think I could have said anything and I would have been hounded. But I just try to, articulate some of my thoughts. And that's what I kind of boiled down to was, I felt like I was getting really caught up in commentators, past players, journalists. But from my experience, I was like, well, I'm a player here. This is actually, we're the ones that have to go and walk out in the field at the moment. And this is kind of our lives. So I really appreciate everyone's position, but at the moment, like I've been given this job, I'm captain, this is our team. I really thank you for your opinions, but at the moment, it doesn't really matter because this is our life we're living. And that's kind of what it boiled down to was I'm going to look after my mates. That's basically my job I've been given. And I appreciate you looking after yours, but at the moment, sorry. I've lost
your ears just fallen off. You've done a Vincent Van Gogh.
Yeah, but at the moment, this is what's important, and it's my teammates.
You were reluctant initially to accept the captaincy. That interests me. But then, in the process of talking about the job, you developed this determination that you actually did want to be a leader and did want to be a captain. Was part of that reluctance early because you weren't sure about leadership and you as a leader?
Definitely that. And also I'd just become a father. So I felt like my plate was really full. Just in those couple of months specifically. I thought it might, I was vice captain, so it wasn't a total surprise, but I thought it was still a year or two away and I could upskill a bit further and start kind of getting my head around different things. So it just all happened very quickly. And I was very happy. I had what felt like a great life, just me and Becky just had our first child. I was really enjoying being part of the team. So there's probably that part of it as well. Added scrutiny, added pressure. I liked being a bowler that could run out there and just bowl all day and not have to think about too much else. But I think after thinking about it and, as the Australian captain, I mean, it's a pretty awesome opportunity. And, I knew I was going to be very well supported and had some wonderful people in the side. Some of my best friends were in that side and I thought, this has got to be the best job in the world. How lucky am I? So it shifted to that pretty quickly.
You've just released a new book, Tested, and it's full of interesting interviews with fascinating individuals who you've come across in your travels. But I actually found the most interesting interview to be with your wife. I mean, it's perverse, isn't it? That you actually have to. It took a lot of arranging to get together with Becky to sit still for long enough to adduce her thoughts. But there's a lovely line in it where there's actually a couple of lovely lines in it where she talks about the early days of your relationship where you're getting on really well and things are moving in a positive direction. All of a sudden, you get the call up to play for Australia in 2017. And she says, you got a phone call and you were gone. It's almost like a country and western song. I know that will appeal to Peter Lawler's musical tastes. and there's also this moment where Albie's born just ahead of your appointment as captaincy. And she says, I was only a few weeks postpartum and physically and mentally exhausted, but I'll never forget the moment I realized I just had to go home and do it alone. I had to, because if Albie and I stayed with him, it would break his heart and also his concentration. He couldn't be captain and a young father in that moment. And I felt the best thing to do was to let him captain. I actually felt quite teary reading that. That is a mountainous self-sacrifice. I can only imagine how it must have felt to you.
Yeah, spot on. I think, most people that travel a little bit in jobs, not all, but most, it's your resting state is at home with a bit of travel sprinkled in. I think for the 3 format cricketers, your resting state's actually on the road with a bit of time at home. And I think that dawned on Becky in 2017. I'd had a couple of injuries. I'd had a few tours, but I was mainly at home. And then suddenly from that first test match I came back in 2017, I was effectively gone with sprinkles of weeks at home occasionally. So that was definitely an adjustment. But then, becoming parents, I think every parent will say they were underprepared, even if they thought they were. And we had no idea. I mean, I flew out 3 or 4 days after Albie was born. It was still during kind of COVID time, so I had to quarantine on the way into Dubai, but then also on the way home. Luckily, her mum was able to come out, but it was like, it's 4 weeks, and then don't worry, we're going to be back together the whole time, the whole summer. No distractions other than an Ashes series where I'll be bowling, but outside of that,
that's manageable.
It's manageable. We'll be fine. Especially that, we kept holding on to these 2 weeks quarantine where it's like forced family time. And of course, a couple of hours, 2 days in, suddenly I'm effectively captain. And I just remember preparing for that Brisbane test, and there was just 1,000 things going through my head. At the same time, I was trying to literally learn how to be a father. I'd been with Albie for less than probably 15 days or so. And I just felt like I was doing both quite poorly. I was just, when I was with Albie, my head was in the cricketing space. When I was with the cricketing space, my head with Albie. And it was a really tough couple of weeks, actually. I think it was only a week after that Brisbane test where I came down to Adelaide and I got got COVID, or didn't get COVID. I was a close contact, close-ish contact, 10 meters or so. And I remember the team manager saying, "Oh, you've got to stay in Adelaide for a week, and just, it's probably the right thing to do." I was like, "Oh, is that the law?" He's like, "It's not the law." And I was like, "I don't care what the law is. I don't care if it's not law. I'm going home. I'll hire myself a Toyota Tarago or something if I have to, team car, and I'll drive back to Sydney," because I just hadn't seen Albie or Becky for those first couple of weeks.
You really have, you've learned on the job, I guess, because you hadn't had a lot of leadership experience. But I think you've brought some unique things to the captaincy. And Glenn Maxwell, who we had on the pod recently, and in his book speaks glowingly of your leadership in that World Cup. There's some fascinating stuff intested about the World Cup, including the admission that you didn't really think that you were good enough to win it. So that kind of had to change your mindset. How does that change your mindset? Is that the same sort of mindset that you have when you're in a second last wicket partnership with Maxi and you've got to put on 200 runs in that? Well, we'll just give it a crack. We'll just do our best. We'll just get funky. What was the change of mindset for the World Cup?
Look, I think if you're, say the 2015 World Cup in Australia, it was home conditions. We had superstar team. Steve Smith was, peak of his powers. He had some, Mitchell Johnson was bowling fast. You had an amazing kind of team. You just kind of felt like you could just go out there basically and play, and you're going to steamroll just about every team, 80%, 90% of the time. I felt like that wasn't so much the case in last year's World Cup. The wickets are obviously quite different to Australia, so maybe the fast bowlers aren't quite as effective as maybe here in Australia. A lot of the other teams have two really good spinners, which can be hard over in India. And a couple of teams had some batting units that were running hot. So I kind of felt like we're still one of the better teams, but I don't think there was anything that made us stand out from the pack, so to say. I kind of thought if we just kind of ran the formula, we would probably get ourselves to the top four, and that would be admirable, and that would be fine. But I don't think it would make us stand out. So we made a concerted effort to kind of take some risks. When Trav Head got injured in South Africa, me and Ronnie, Andrew McDonald and George straight away that was when we thought we'd lost our World Cup, because we knew he was one of those trump cards. And to really Ronnie's credit, he the next morning he'd stayed up all night thinking about it, and he goes, "No, I think we can get him back for the New Zealand game." And we're happy to take that risk, basically, rather than picking a second spinner or whatever in the squad. For us, that was a calculated risk. And, even in that first one or two games that we lost, I think we played poorly, but almost more importantly, we didn't play the kind of style that we'd signed up to kind of, we wanted everyone to play, which was aggressive, risk-taking. And then after that, we kind of recalibrated and it all worked out.
You redefined failure, didn't you? You said failure is perhaps not taking those risks, perhaps taking the conservative option at the wrong time is failure, going into your shell.
That's it. You've got to accept failure is going to happen. And we're big on defining that almost before you fail. Well, if you're a naturally aggressive player and you get out trying to defend, you're actually not giving yourself the best chance. And of course, there's the flip side. If someone's a naturally defensive player and they go outside their shell, it works in the opposite as well. But we try and be quite specific in what we expect of players. And then it's obviously up to them to do it their own way. And they have full license to do it their own way. But it's, especially a World Cup, it's not a 2-horse race. It's 10 teams. You can't just expect to be there at the end.
I enjoyed that innings the other night. That was a fascinating game of one-day cricket. And in particular, that straight drive 4 that you played in the last over. I thought, gee, has he been sweating on that shot? Has he just been waiting for that ball to get it? Because that was an emphatic shot, and that looked like the one you'd been waiting for, the statement you wanted to make.
Yeah, I was waiting to kind of get a little bit fuller, but they kept going back of a length. But I felt like it was a pretty good wicket. So it was kind of waiting for the full one. I've lost another earphone. Sorry. Good luck to your editing team, Pete.
No, we leave the mistakes in, Pat. We leave them in.
Again, I think over the last 5-ish years, I think I can get quite boring with my batting. I think I'm better when I try and hit the ball. So I keep trying to remind myself that. And over the last couple of months, while I've had a break, been able to work on that a little bit. And again, kind of to the failure point, I'm probably more happy to fail by being a touch over aggressive than kind of trying to just hang around, because I feel like there's enough evidence to show that doesn't work.
Like that shot at Delhi, Pat. It's got to be the worst shot ever played by an Australian captain, doesn't it?
What was Delhi? Yeah, that wasn't a good one.
No,
that really wasn't a good one.
No.
That was one of those ones. Yeah. Let's move on.
I did looking for the social media viral moment here, Pat, to put your antenna up. Did Gulam call you a wanker when you were bowling? Gulam, wasn't it? When he was...
Oh, the Pakistan batter?
Yeah.
Oh, not that I heard.
He came... Didn't you see that? It was an extraordinary moment. He let the ball go. You sort of said, no, and then just a smile lit up on your face as you sort of heard. I thought it must have been a Pakistan word, but it sounded like he called you a wanker.
Oh, right. Okay. No, it just looked like his beans were going when he walked out there. You know, I think he'd run at a couple of spinners, then he's kind of looking to try and show it, make his presence. And yeah, I do remember that. I don't remember what he said.
We'll go back and look at the tape because I think an accusation has been made. Right. Yeah.
I'll ask him on Friday.
Yeah.
Pat, you're covered so assiduously and so intrusively by television cameras and on pitch microphones and your every word is analysed. But your period as captain's also coincided with unprecedented transparency in the Australian setup, because you did invite the makers of the documentary series The Test in to film with unexampled proximity to the team. How does that sit with you, and how faithful is it to the reality of the world that you inhabit, and what do you think it's done to the perception of the Australian team over the last few years?
Yeah, I should probably say that we agreed to it before I was captain, so I continued it on. Look, I'd be lying if I said everyone was jumping up and down about it. We all know how sacred a change room is. We're very reluctant to let, say, broadcasters ever into the change room, maybe after a series win once, but we try and set some rules because basically, as you said, as soon as you walk out of that change room, there's cameras, there's microphones, there's everything. So, I think after seeing, most of the players, and this is kind of what won everyone over, was most of the players has watched, say, the All or Nothing series on some of the English Premier League teams or some of the NFL sides, or Drive to Survive.
Yeah.
And everyone was big fans of those series. Like everyone loved those series. So we kind of felt like, look, there's a lot of positives if we do a series. And we all imagine us as cricket fans, as kids or whatever, and being able to watch, our favourite era of cricketers and what was going on in the change room. So try to frame like that. And then, of course, it's about how do you try and make it not, affect how you operate as a team. So it's only just one cameraman. All the series have been one cameraman. He sneaks some microphones in around the dugout and the cubicles and things like that. So really, you don't really notice he's there. You forget about it straight away. And then, obviously we've got some editing rights, but we try and stay true to it as much as we can. Occasionally there's some selection talks or we're talking about a certain player and, we just, it's our preference not that's not made public, and we'll remove that. But, very rarely, and I think, people like Ronnie and the coaching staff, they're very, very private. They don't really like it. So they're the ones you probably got to convince more than the players.
Yes. Yep. It interested me that, in the first series of the Test, there was a lot of interest in those brief interludes where the team and Langer seemed to be at cross purposes. There were just a few little tense exchanges. They were endlessly discussed and endlessly anatomized. And there was a lot of people said, well, that's not representative of what the relationship is really like. And, it's that those kind of interchanges have been misrepresented, and both Khawaja and Langer commented publicly on them. But the strange thing was that it did foretell a kind of a gradual attenuation in the relationship between you and Justin Langer. What does that tell us about the capacity of the camera to capture the true essence of things that sometimes even eludes the people who are involved?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, on that first series, it was all approved. So I think, at the time, everyone was obviously pretty happy with how it was represented. And I think would still be.
Yep.
I think, the interesting point I find when I go back and watch them is there's a lot of interactions that you see on the documentary that I wouldn't have even been privy to. I'd be out in the field, or I'd be out in the nets, and that's happening in the change room, or vice versa. So I think there's that level to it. But I think things change over time as well. Some of the say that first series was, what would that have been, 2018, 2019? That's good 5 years ago. So things can change with the times as well, which at the time that might have been exactly what was right, what was needed, but upon reflection, maybe it's different to what you think is needed in a dressing room right at this current moment.
The major drama in the most recent one, of course, centres around Lords and all the things that happened there. I don't think you guys were very upfront about it at the time, and I understand why. But I think that put some terrible stresses on the team, and I was wondering what it looked like from your position. And as a leader of that team, I mean, Kez copped a terrible pasting, and we were reassured that it wasn't getting to him. But I'm not so sure that you can be impervious to that. I mean, you had family over there at the time. Families were affected by it, weren't they? There were people family members leaving the ground because they were being abused. There were kids in tears from the Australian team. Did you sort of take that on? Were you in the bunker at the time and try and deal with that situation as a leader?
Yeah, of course, the best you can. It was unprecedented in a lot of ways, really, where, well, no one did anything wrong, but the amount of abuse and, scrutiny that it just kind of went from, it was already a 10 out of 10 to it just, the dial went up fivefold after that. So I think, even if you are super headstrong, there's no way that cannot affect you. To what we was talking about a little bit earlier around about how open you are with the media and things like that. A lot of the time you're protecting yourself from extra clutter and distraction and noise. And that's what that series had. And it just, after Lords, it was just ramped up like I'd never seen before. So, as kind of leaders, of course, we try and put your arm around different players. We talked about it. You acknowledge it. There's no point hiding from it. You try to stay on course. But I think you'd be lying if you said it doesn't have some effect on you.
There were death threats, weren't there, received by the team?
I don't know. Maybe. Was there? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we got death threats, didn't you, Peter, from appearing on Piers Morgan?
From some of our players.
I thought I held my line.
Actually, I reckon this is actually an interesting area to drill down in. So you're out on the field a lot of the time, and a lot of the time you have spent in your career near the boundary. Tell us about the behaviour of crowds over the course of your career. Has it become noticeably worse? Are they noticeably angrier? Do they more obviously regard you as fair game, that you just have to cop it, that you just have to suck it up? Because I did think that last year in England. I did think the English crowds were perceptively angrier than I could ever remember them. And I don't know what that was because of. Was it post-Brexit, whether it was post-COVID or what?
Yeah, hard to know. I wouldn't say I've noticed a huge difference in terms of over the, say, 15 years. I definitely felt like England was more of a, say at Edgbaston, you've normally got the Hollies there, and that's a quarter of the field, and that can get quite rancid at times. I think it felt like more of a whole stadium mob for that tour. The funny thing was, Lords, I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, never in a million years would you expect that at Lords. Never seen anything like it." And I agree, I've never seen anything like it, but there's only been one other time I've ever played where we got booed by a whole crowd, and that was at Lords in, I think it was 2015. We played an ODI there, and there was a obstruction in the field, and we got booed off.
Yeah.
Ben Stokes.
Yep.
And there's 2 times in my life I've been booed by 100% of the crowd.
Yeah, right.
And there was both there. So I don't know. Definitely that series was, the emotion of that series was unlike anything I've seen in any format anywhere in the world.
Even India?
Yeah, I think India's it's always passionate, but it's never, they'll go silent.
Yeah.
But they're just as likely to clap good cricket from both sides.
Yep.
So yeah, I never find India turns into abuse. They're there to see good cricket.
Pat, what have you got against Sheffield Shield cricket? You played 3 Sheffield Shield cricket games in 2011-12. 6 years passed and you played another one. In the intervening period, you've played about 5 more. I think you've got a sum total of 9 Sheffield Shield games in 13-year Test career. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, you may be unique because you struggle with injury in those early days, but it's for players who get into the Test side early, as you did, the Shield's becoming increasingly irrelevant on some levels. We see its relevance on other levels in the Great Australian Bat-Off at the moment. But
yeah. Well, the line I always like to use is I haven't lost a Sheffield Shield game since early 2011. So
unlike New South Wales.
That was the one where you bowled
exactly.
180 overs, wasn't it, in the final against Hobart?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm still recovering from that one.
Yeah.
Look, I don't really know what, say, happened 20 years ago, but I mean, with the schedule nowadays, you've just got to pick your battles. Even if you don't play Shield, in a busy year, I think last year I would have played close to 100 days of cricket, maybe a little bit more. So that becomes the priority is, how do you maximize the amount of games and days you're available for Australia, really? As it stands, we're still get rested from the occasional Aussie game. So, we always encourage players to, if they want to play, for example, Joshy Hazlewood missed the ODI on Monday to play the Sheffield Shield game for New South Wales. That was his preference. Starkey the same the week before. For me, I'm I find one-day cricket's quite a good building. You get the intensity, but it's 10 overs. You get the time on legs. It's actually a really good way to build into a season. If we didn't have the ODIs, I 100% would have played probably 2 Shield games. But yeah, kind of mapping back, the priority for me over the last probably 5 months, we'll say 5 months leading to this first test, was to try and get as long a break as I could to get my hamstrings right and all those things that build up over the course of the last 2 years, which I feel like I have been able to do, and then kind of build up to that first test. And yeah, Shield games after this ODIs are a bit too close to the test, and the ones before the ODIs I felt were a bit too far away.
You've been retained in the IPL auction, and you've also got an interest, which San Francisco Unicorns, isn't it? Your side?
That's it.
It's elite level trolling, Cummins. Elite level. Well, Major League Cricket sort of turned the head of a few Australians. What is it that's attractive to you guys? I know Steve's very keen on it too, Steve Smith.
Yeah, well, Steve has a real love for New York. Look, I think, there's plenty of different franchise leagues that open up around the world. They're great fun to play. I think that's probably the most important thing is they're just really good fun. It's good high quality cricket, but you also get a bit more breaks than you do in, say, an international schedule or in Test match cricket, where you're waking up at 7 every morning, you're not getting back till 7. Over there, you're playing every second day. You get a bit more time to go and explore. I think this US is a place that we don't get to experience heaps as cricketers. I've only been there on holiday once or twice. We've traveled to, South Africa, India, even England, these places, tens and tens of times. So I think just something different. It's kind of an upstart, but just the enjoyment really of that league. It's great fun.
Pat, the modern player exists in this kind of environment of abundance, full of opportunities and unexpected openings. What would you not do? What commercial entanglement would you avoid? Whose money would you not take? I ask because cricket's busy cozying up to Saudi Arabia at the moment, an oppressive, self-perpetuating autocracy, and an overwhelming contributor to climate change, whom I wouldn't have thought as aligning particularly well with your public values. Would you take the Saudi shilling if it came to it?
Yeah, look, it hasn't really entered my sphere yet. No doubt it probably will at some point within cricket. Look, I think looking from afar, I think some other sports probably haven't done it in an ideal way. But it's there. There's obviously a lot of these kind of companies sponsor, say, ICC events and things like that. So I think, whether you like it or not, there is, just by nature of playing ICC events for Australia, playing all these different leagues, you do open yourself up to a lot of different commercial partners.
Okay.
I probably
simple
don't have
yes
a
or no
stance.
would suffice, Pat.
No, I'm
I'll
enjoying
get back
this.
to you with a yes or no. Thanks, Gideon. Look, I think you'd need to have a hard look at how it was structured, and yeah. I don't have a hard yes or no for you at the moment. Sorry, Gideon.
Okay,
There is a
all right.
perception that you've been involved in breaking relationships with sponsors over your sort of climate change beliefs.
Yeah, and that's absolutely false. Again, I do have some strong beliefs, but I also, my job's as cricket captain, and I want to make sure that on balance, I've got cricket that's really important to me and I'm really passionate about. You've got, say, climate change, and that's really important and passionate about. On balance, I think some things can be maybe not as good for one part of those passions, but better for the other. And it's about balancing those. So, a couple of the commercial arrangements that I kind of stepped back from, I'd been looking after them for a few years because I thought that was what was best for cricket, but I thought time would kind of run its course.
Yes.
What are you hoping to? You set up cricket for climate. What are you hoping to actually achieve with that? Is it to encourage debate? Is it to encourage practical action? Or is it just to find your way in this sort of environment that we find ourselves now?
It's a bit of all of that, but I think most importantly, it's that tangible, practical action. That's what I've always tried to speak about. I don't really feel comfortable talking about things just for the sake of exposure or awareness. It doesn't really sit that well with me. I would like to point to tangible, practical actions that that make a real difference, and in some ways might show a path forward for other people that might want to, start making changes. That's what was my experience anyway. Was I wanted to make some changes, but I didn't know really what to do. So you start looking out to what other people have already done. So I think that's, for example, putting solar panels on plenty of cricket clubs. That's probably the main part of it, is showing that you can decarbonize a club. But there's also lots of different fringe benefits that you may not have first thought of. Saving Penrith Cricket Club, we save $3,000 to $4,000 a year by putting those solar panels on the club. It creates great conversations around the club, and then a lot of these people go and put solar panels on their house, and it might not be for climate change reasons, it might be for economical reasons, but that's absolutely fine.
Cricket Australia has now got an environmental secretariat or something like that, and sort of late to the party, like most of Australia, really. Are there any practical changes that you're pushing for or that you're aware of that are going to happen? I mean, are you going to be driving electric buses this year? Are you going to be catching public transport to the ground? I don't know. Midnight Oil offset their flights with rainforests up in Timor, like directly. Do you have are any of those plans in place yet, Pat?
No hard and fast, or no real plans for this summer, but we've started talking about things. Every department in Cricket Australia started talking about different ways they can make a difference. So for us as a cricket team, how start looking at, say, the way we travel, the way we freight all our gear that goes around, the one-time use kind of products that we use around the change rooms, the waste of food, all those kind of things. What small changes can we make there within our own team? But as a broader organisation, I think we do have in Australia alone something like 8 million cricket lovers a population of over 8 million cricket lovers who do look to sports for guidance on different topics and different things. And I think we can show a path forward for those people. We can do things the right way, where everybody wins, by making some small changes. The cricket centre up in Queensland, we put a huge solar system on that building. So I think we're getting there. We're making some changes. Of course, we can be doing some more.
You made an interesting, practical, tangible gesture a few years ago when you donated $50,000 towards medical supplies in India during the middle of COVID, during the IPL, that IPL season was disrupted by COVID. I'd like you, can you talk me through your thinking on that subject and go to the question of, are players generous enough? Players get a lot of money. Players are handling a lot of money. A lot of it is passing through their hands at any one time. Should they be more philanthropic? Should they be more alert to the opportunity to make individual differences?
Yeah. On that donation, it was in the middle of IPL. I was really lucky. I had a great salary for that year, super lucky. So the conversation at that point was, there was a lot of people in India that were doing it tough, and the kind of the sentiment in India at that time, or the question was, is IPL a good thing for India, or is it a welcome distraction, or is it actually logistically getting in the way, in terms of resources and things like that? I try to speak to quite a few people, like UNICEF, for example, and they said, on balance, they thought the IPL was a really good thing. It kept people in homes each night, those kind of things. So then I made the kind of call, well, how can I try and help? India's given me so much, particularly, in that kind of 2-month stretch. So could I try and do a little bit? So that was probably the extent of my thinking around that. In terms of can players do more? Look, no doubt, I'm sure everyone can do more. We live in a really lucky country. We're all very healthy, well-resourced, those kind of things. I think it's, it is, your money is your own money. You can do what you want with it. So it's pretty hard to press people to make choices if they don't want to. I'd really hope that even if it's not financial, we don't lose sight of how lucky we are. And cricket's been that vehicle for us. And we want to make sure that the next generations have those same opportunities. We want to make sure that, there's more fans and more young boys and girls who are playing because of what we're doing and how we're acting. I think that's something we can't lose sight of. And hopefully, some of the guys have some passion points they put money into or their time into. But of course, everyone could be doing a bit more.
I noticed that it was reported in India that you made your donation to Narendra Modi's PM Cares Fund. And yet I read on your own Twitter that you actually made the donation to UNICEF's Australia-India COVID-19 crisis appeal. It would be so unlike Narendra Modi to want to take credit for something he had nothing to do with. Can you just clarify exactly where the money went?
Yeah, look, that was partly my own fault, because the advice we'd got, I'd ask again a couple of people where best to kind of have the biggest impact, and that was the original thought that we we're going to kind of donate to. And then we spoke to some others, and particularly UNICEF in Australia, got their guidance, and decided to go kind of with the UNICEF India kind of fund.
India's on the way, Pat. Are you lying awake at night thinking about it yet, or are you still Captain Cool? Can you get through 5 tests in this summer? I mean, it's a serious question. That's a hard summer in Australia where you can do a lot of bowling. What are your thoughts on where you'll be and what you'll do this summer?
Look, I hope so. I feel as fresh as I have for a long time. I feel great. So physically, I feel awesome. of course, it's 5 test matches. Things pop up. So yeah, we're going with the intention that all 3 quick bowlers will play all 5, but realistically, and history would suggest that probably won't happen. I think last year we played 7 straight, which was a huge outlier. And a couple of those test matches were a bit shorter than you'd imagine this summer might be. But I hope so. I'm expecting to play all 5. But it's very important. You've got guys like Michael Nesser and Scott Boland and a few of the guys you'll see in the Aussie A game this week who are ready to go, because I'm pretty sure we'll need a call on them at some point.
Have you counselled Greenie about his injury? Have you spoken to him? That's a significant blow to that young player.
Yeah, it is. It's cold saying. Yeah, I've spoken to Greenie a little bit about it. Look, unfortunately or fortunately, he's been through it before. It's a pretty slow old process. Obviously, surgery is a little bit different, but it's kind of that slow build up where you're sitting around waiting for your bones to heal, and you can't really speed up that process. So, he's young. All the advice I got when I was going through these things is you're young, you're going to have a long career ahead of it. You're not wasting any time. If anything, it's hopefully you'll make up for that time in the back end. And of course, that's kind of the advice you pass on to Greenie. It's easy giving the advice. It's pretty hard receiving it. I found it very hard receiving it. But the reality is you've just got to wait. There's not much else you can do. So make the most of the time at home.
Was that Cole's hand telling us that we've got to wind up there? Media manager Cole Hitchcock.
Yes.
Howdy, Cole.
Yes.
All right. Well, I got one last question, and we haven't discussed your book at all, which is a shame because it's a very interesting book, and I enjoyed the interviews, and I did find them. I think you're a very sympathetic interlocutor. You've done a good job on drawing people out. You're doing our job obviously better than we are. One of the people that you interview, I got the feeling sometimes that you were actually thinking through things yourself with the help of others. And obviously one of the people that you interviewed was Julia Gillard. And one of the interesting things that she said was that, she has made a success of post-political life in the sense that she has not suffered from relevance deprivation syndrome. She has actually managed to slip away and do good works out of public sight. She says, it's important to step away. You can be a resource to the next leaders, but you've had your go. Is that pretty much your perspective? Does that mean that at the end of your career, and I guess that's in sight by now, you will actually exit cricket altogether? You will not sort of want to work in coaching or work at administration. You'll look to build a second half of your life that is completely independent of the first?
Yeah, I imagine so. I think the proof will be in the pudding. But that's kind of where my head's at the moment. Again, hopefully I'll play for another, call it, 5 years at least. That gets me to kind of mid-30s. I would have been doing this for 20 seasons. So I think I'll be ready for something else, at least, initially. I think more importantly, just I've spent a lot of time away from home. I want to spend more time at home once I finish. But yeah, that really resonated with me, what Miss Gillard said around, I thought she had some really good guardrails for herself in how she wanted to think about things. And she was very deliberate about when she entered the public's, conversation and when she didn't. So, for her example was, well, the way she kind of mentioned was when she was Prime Minister, she was across everything. You have every, all your people working for you, but you see every brief you could possibly imagine, and you feel well versed and you feel able to speak about things. And I suppose, at the moment I'm similar in that anything to do with the team, I'm across, I'm here. But once she'd kind of finished her prime ministership, obviously she's not up to date, but things like, mental health, women's leadership, she was very much at the bleeding edge of, even after her career, she felt like she was very well versed in that, was up to date. So she feels very comfortable talking about those subjects. But outside of that, she said she would, almost as a blanket rule, would never enter any conversation publicly. She's had her time. She doesn't know what the most up-to-date thing is, so she'd rather the people in the know talk about it.
You're in the know at the moment over who's going to open the batting for Australia. Tell us.
Usman,
Really?
I'm pretty sure.
Too good for us, Pat Cummins.
I love the way you call her Miss Gillard, by the way. Your mum would be really proud of you. That's so respectful.
Thank you.
I met
it.
Grandma the other day. She's an impressive woman.
Nana, yeah, she had a time
Nana.
of her life at the book launch.
Yeah.
She loved it.
She got a look on her face when I said I'd given you a clip over the ears about something on radio that morning. She wasn't. She doesn't like it when people criticise.
She'll find you. She'll find you. She's got her favourites.
Well, we'd always be very happy to have her on the podcast. It's been great to have you today, Pat. It's been well worth waiting for. We've really enjoyed the chat. I don't think there's any doubt that you call it as you see it, and I always like a cricketer who gives a straight answer to a straight question. And I'm always conscious of the one who's not giving a straight answer to a straight question and who knows it. So I look forward to further discussions about Saudi Arabian involvement in cricket, because I just don't think you can completely sanitize the involvement of the Public Investment Fund in sporting activities. But look forward to exploring with you that down the track, Pat. Thanks very much for joining us on Cricket et al. Today.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. We'll see you around the summer.
And thanks for subscribing, Pat. You are one of our subscribers, aren't you?
Yes, of course.
You are.
He is.
He is. Yeah.
Pete set me up with it.
Well, I know you blokes never actually pay for subscriptions. Yeah.
Just remember us all when you guys get massive. That's all I say. Some of us early podcast guests. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
You're officially a friend of the pod.
What goes around comes around.
That status lasts for 2 years.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks, Pat.
mate.
Cheers, Cole.
See you soon. Cheers.
That's all we've got time for on Cricket et al, the podcast today. Don't forget to subscribe to cricketetal.com, the website experience. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from me.
And it's good night from him.